Our next session, Decarbonizing the Built Environment and Cultivating a Sustainable Workforce. Please welcome to the stage our moderator, CEO of North America We Don't Have Time, Shweta Chakraborty, President Commercial HVAC Americas, Trane Technologies, Holly Paper, Associate Partner JB&B, Christopher D. Colasanti, and Senior Principal RMI, Rachel Golden.
Oh, it's bright.
Thank you. Okay, nobody warned us about just how comfortable these chairs would be, so nobody's allowed to fall asleep here, okay? We have a lot to talk about. This is gonna be a great session. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being engaged. We're gonna be talking about the built environment. And it doesn't sound so sexy off the bat, right? We talk about food and climate, we talk about fashion and climate. How much do we really talk about, buildings and climate? But actually, the built environment is responsible for 30% of total energy consumption and 40% of global emissions, and that's significant. And if we can get a grip on our built environment, that is real action that we can take to combat carbon emissions right now. And you're gonna hear the panelists talk about this. So I'm really excited to have these three experts on stage to get into this conversation. To my left is Holly Paper. She is the President of Commercial HVAC Americas at Trane Technologies. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you.
We have Christopher Colasanti, Associate Partner at JB&B. And I know you prefer Chris, so Chris Colasanti. And Rachel Golden, Senior Principal of Carbon-Free Buildings at the Rocky Mountain Institute. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask each of you to just give a little context as to the work that you do as it relates to the built environment, and I'm gonna start with you, Holly.
Sure. So as mentioned, I lead our commercial HVAC business at Trane Technologies. And our business is really focused on bringing thermal and energy solutions to customers across a variety of spaces. So think about pretty much everything other than a residential building. And so we bring equipment, services, advise customers on how to decarbonize. So everything we do in our business and in our company is about sustainability and bringing sustainable solutions to customers.
Excellent. Thank you. Chris?
Sure. Thanks for having us today. I really appreciate this. So I work for JB&B, and we're a mechanical and electrical design engineering firm that focuses on infrastructure systems for buildings. So these are all the systems that make buildings function, make them breathe, make them interact with people, the data, the electric, the HVAC, all those things that are good but consume a lot of energy. And so we have a group in our office called the Deep Carbon Reduction Group. I lead that team, and we focus on taking our engineering expertise and delivering decarbonized solutions for buildings, how to take them from where they are now to reduce the carbon and energy in the future. So we're going to get into that a little bit today.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you. Rachel?
Great, thank you. So I work for RMI, or Rocky Mountain Institute, and RMI is an international, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that seeks to decarbonize all sectors of the economy by 2050. My team, the Carbon-Free Buildings team, is focused on decarbonizing the building sector. My particular role is really focused on state and federal regulations and policy to accelerate an equitable electrification of the sector.
Okay, so I'm going to throw out this question to all the panelists. Really curious about your views here, and really take the opportunity to educate those that might not know about the role that the built environment plays in the bigger global picture, the bigger global carbon emissions picture. And you would think it would be top of mind, because it's actually where we spend the majority of our time, is inside the built environment. We wake up, we're inside our homes, we go to work, we're inside buildings there as well. And so there is not a lot of awareness, despite that, of how much of a role it's playing. So we need to debunk some of those myths, or rather raise awareness as to how our engagement with the built environment is actually impacting our physical environment. So with that, I'm going to ask you first, Holly, let's start with you again. The built environment is actually at a really unique moment in that we can do something about it. So why is it so important to take the time to decarbonize buildings?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you mentioned in the intro how much time and how much energy we spend in buildings and the greenhouse gas associated with buildings. So 15%, we estimate 15% globally is spent in terms of greenhouse gas is about heating and cooling buildings. So heating and cooling of buildings is a big offender, frankly, of the environment. And the industry around this has been part of the climate crisis that we have today. But it's still the same industry that has the position and the scale to do something about it. And technology exists today to transform the way that we heat and cool buildings globally. So it's something, right? It's a moment now because the issues are only getting bigger, and we have all of the solutions we need to start to bend the climate curve.
That's actually, that might be shocking for some people to hear. You're saying we have everything we need right now to solve the built environment issue. Chris, please expand on this.
Yeah, when we think about sustainable buildings and going back, 10 years, oftentimes, a building was rated based on its LEED certification or an environmental rating, or maybe it just met the energy code, meaning it just meets the minimum threshold to exist and meet building codes. But what's happened now is that we actually have to make a difference, and so we're seeing a transition from these certifications, which were which were just largely based on how a building's designed, and now it's about how the building's actually operating. What are the emissions actually in the building? What's actually occurring for real? And we're seeing a whole kind of shift in the way people are thinking about it. They're thinking about, what does a building look like every year? What are the carbon emissions this year versus next year? They're having to get tracked on a corporate level. And so we've upped the ante, right? It's not just a check mark somewhere. And to Holly's point, so many things have changed since the before and now. Studies and research and new products that have come on the market and demonstrations to show how it can be done. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And I just believe, here we are. It's a huge portion of the carbon emissions pie. There's so much of the rest of the pie that's very hard to deal with, like international shipping and aviation and coal-powered power plants in India and China. But this is something we actually know what to do. And this transition has just shown that we're capable and we can make change. So I'm very excited about that.
So we said that pretty much at the start of this session, but we're going to hear it again, and I'm going to make sure we close with that too, because it's such a critical point that we can do this right now. We don't have to wait. Some of these other sectors may take a little bit longer to decarbonize, but the built environment is exciting because it's a moment we can take advantage of right now.
Yeah.
Rachel, please.
Yeah, I'd love to build on this. So we heard that building emissions are a huge source of global climate pollution, and that it's a problem that we can solve today. I think the third thing I wanted to add is that as we decarbonize buildings, it benefits not just the climate, but everyone in this room, everyone who lives in a home or works in a building. As we decarbonize, we're going to see much more resilient and comfortable buildings. We're going to see improved air quality and health outcomes, and we're going to see increased affordability. So maybe I'll just spend a moment to expand upon each of those. So in terms of resilience, if you think about it, buildings are really our first line of defense against climate change and natural disasters. So think of heat waves, cold spikes, wildfires. We depend on our homes, our schools, our hospitals to provide reliable heating and cooling and to keep us safe. And as you decarbonize, right, as you improve efficiency, you get heat pumps, you have distributed energy resources and batteries. That is the ticket to resilience. It's also the ticket to climate mitigation, but that's what's going to keep you safe. So there's the resilience piece. The second thing I wanted to emphasize is on air quality and health. This has come out a lot more in the media in the last year or two, is the really detrimental indoor air quality impacts and health impacts of burning combustion appliances like using gas stoves, gas water heaters, furnaces in our homes. And what the EPA has found is that actually, in most cases, indoor air quality is 2 to 5 times worse than outdoor air quality. And that's really scary because we spend up to 90% of our time indoors. So it's really important, especially in smaller apartments, that you have very good air quality. And so one way to make air quality better is to stop using combustion appliances, especially those that don't properly vent outside. So again, as you decarbonize buildings, you start phasing out gas, getting heat pumps, your indoor air quality is going to improve dramatically. And I wanted to add that, especially if you think about New York City and all the apartments, those with gas appliances that are very small has a disproportionately harmful impact on health for children, elderly, and BIPOC communities. So this is a real equity issue as well. And then the third point, if you don't mind, that I wanted to hit on is affordability. I think we all see rising housing costs, rising energy bills. A report came out just last month by the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy showing that 1 in 4 Americans spend over 15% of their income on energy bills alone. That's really, really high. High energy burden is considered 6%, so this is 2 times that. So we really need decarbonization solutions that are going to help to lower energy bills and also help to make new construction more affordable and lower cost. Once again, the decarbonization solutions that we're going to talk about are going to do those things. For most Americans, as you decarbonize, your energy bills will go down and the cost of new construction will go down as well. So what keeps me in this work is not just the climate benefits, but the real life benefits to all of us.
Yeah, you raised some really interesting points there. There's health benefits, there are economic benefits, there's environmental benefits. These are, you know, win-win-wins if we get it right. And there's new technologies that are evolving that's helping it get easier, right? To reduce energy consumption, to reduce emissions. So talk to us a little bit about this, Holly. What are we looking forward to? What's here and what can we look forward to?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually had a pretty heated discussion before we came on stage here, and it just shows the power of these events and bringing people together. But I think what you're hearing all of us say is that, you know, to decarbonize our future means we have to decarbonize buildings, and to decarbonize buildings, we need to decarbonize the way we heat and cool. And you know, there are a bunch of technologies that exist, but it's not about a technology or a solution. It's about the holistic way that you bring that together to solve a problem in terms of what a building owner is trying to do, in addition to the greenhouse gas footprint, in addition to efficiency, in addition to cost. And so we've got some technologies that we'll talk about. I think the first one, Rachel mentioned heat pumps a moment ago. So for those of you who don't know what that is,
which was me, by the way.
It's pretty simple, right? It's about taking heat from where you don't need it and bringing it to where you need it. And you know, from a technical standpoint, at a really high level, you know, it's like, think about in the wintertime, you want to warm an indoor space. So you take heat from the outside, and the fluid that you use absorbs that heat. You compress it to make it the temperature you want, and then you bring it through a building. In the summer, when you want to be cool inside, you take the heat from in the building and you put it outside. It reverses the process. And so it's technology that allows us to think differently about kind of the free energy and how we use that. So, you know, as I think about the technologies that exist today, we've got heat pump technology that's available today that allows our customers to eliminate the need for from having a separate kind of cooling kind of plant and a separate heating plant and bringing it together into one all-electric system. We have the ability to do things like thermal batteries. And so these are really innovative solutions where, you know, we've got customers who purchase electricity in the evening when it's more available and it's cheaper, make ice and use that ice to cool the building during the day. And by the way, those solutions can be connected to renewables and electrified systems. All of this wrapped in kind of smart buildings and smart controls. By itself, a building is kind of a dumb box. And so the spirit here is making it a smart, efficient system that is able to give back to the environment versus take from. And so there's solutions here today. You know, we certainly can transform how we do this, but it's about a holistic approach, and there's a lot of ways that we can help customers not only drive efficiency rates that are, you know, 3 to 4 times what they've got now, but also do so with a pretty short payback and a very low carbon footprint.
So Chris, I'd love to pick your brain on what Holly just brought up, the different solutions that are here. Yeah. And then I'm going to come to Rachel about the policy around this, because one thing I want to say is, when you were talking about gas stoves, right? Even if I don't want a gas stove, if a gas line is brought to my building and I want to replace it with some sort of induction device, but I can't for whatever reason because it's just it's too costly or it's too difficult. Why is it that there aren't policies in place that just ensure that that's not even the default, that gas isn't the default? So I want to come to you to understand the policy that's still needed around this. But before that, please.
Yes. You know, Holly, I have my solar panel socks on today because I think they're so cool, but actually, I think I need a t-shirt next, which is like the heat pumps are magic t-shirt, because honestly, it's the reality. I want to touch on the heat pumps part. It's so cool. You know, if in your house, maybe you have a thermostat on the wall that you adjust and it turns on that electric baseboard radiator that makes a little clicking noise and lets some heat off. That's an electric resistance heater. If you had a heat pump to do that same job as the electric resistance heater, it would use about 1/3 of the energy, 1/3 of the electricity. So that's what we're talking here. It's like a power of 3 difference. In the summertime, we're talking about like a 1/6 amount of energy being used. So really, honestly, these heat pumps are truly magic. I mean, they started as refrigerators 100 years ago, And now they've evolved to complex pieces of equipment that we use to heat and cool our buildings. And like Holly said, when coupled with thermal energy storage, renewable power, it really is a transformative system that can change the way buildings work. It's just so cool.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. No, thank you for. We love heat pumps here. I don't know if you're picking up on that, but that's like the buzzword. So what's on your bingo card? Gas stoves is another buzzword, right? Talk about the headlines gas stoves make. But seriously, why is it so hard to move policy away from natural gas lines to buildings? As one example, but please take it away.
Sure. I mean, I think we've actually made a ton of progress on the policy front. So maybe let me touch on that first. Sure. I'll say that a decade ago, when I personally began doing this work, very few people were talking about heat pumps. I think most climate and clean energy advocates and decision makers were all focused on efficiency and renewables, which is great, but they weren't focused on how do we actually drastically phase down the 30% of gas use that we use in our homes and buildings for heating. Fast forward to today, when I look across the US, most serious climate planners have electrification at the center of their climate plans. So I think a tremendous amount of progress is happening across the US, which is really encouraging. Maybe I'll just kind of paint the picture a little bit so you can see what the landscape looks like on decarbonization policy. So first is at the city level. Over 100 different cities and counties, close to 150 cities and counties, have adopted building codes or energy codes that either require or strongly incentivize all electric new construction and retrofits. So that means that as new buildings get built in those cities, we're not extending the gas lines. We're not filling those apartments or homes with gas lines that have gas stoves. Rather, they'll be all electric. So there's been a tremendous amount of progress at the city level. Second is the state level, and this is very exciting. We're seeing that public utilities commissions, so these are the commissions, the decision makers that regulate all the different utilities across the US, they are increasingly starting to regulate gas utilities and how we do our planning to align with climate. So we're seeing a ton of new incentives coming out for heat pumps and electrification. The Inflation Reduction Act brings $9 billion of those incentives to all of us across the US. We're seeing those regulators change how utilities are doing their gas planning. So for example, here in New York, the Public Service Commission has opened up a proceeding that's looking at what's called non-pipelines alternatives. And don't fall asleep, because this is actually very exciting. What it does is say that a utility can't just go and invest tons of, millions of dollars of ratepayer dollars into repairing and replacing gas lines. Instead, they need to look at what are the non-pipes alternatives, like using that funding to electrify entire communities and other solutions as well. So we are seeing a real change in how regulators are approaching this. In terms of legislation, the Building Decarbonization Coalition has came out with a fantastic report that showed that in the last year, in 2024, there were over 130 bills across the US, across 30 states, on building decarbonization alone. If you go back a decade ago, it probably would have been 1 or 2 bills. And a third of those bills have already passed. So we're seeing legislative progress, regulatory progress, city progress, and there's been tremendous leadership by the Biden administration at the federal level as well. So I'm optimistic. I'm seeing things move. Why it's challenging is obviously there's incumbent interests that don't want to lose their business.
Sure. we love sticking to the default, the status quo, right? Yeah. Because nobody really likes change. Everybody wants change, but nobody likes it. So we need to figure out how to communicate to get audiences excited, to get policymakers to move in accordance with the data, the statistics, the facts. And that's something we will come to. I look forward to talking about communication, because we're all communicating about this sector, and that's important to be advocates for the built environment, for transitioning the built environment to clean energy. So that's part of this whole process, right, to get policy to move. So now, the policy that Rachel set up for us, I'd love to hear some case studies of how you first, Chris, and then Holly, are leveraging these policies for your clients. Let's get some good examples here.
Yeah. So Rachel mentioned, some of the local policies, city policies around the country, and this is near and dear to me because based in New York, a lot of our work is here. There's a law here in New York City called Local Law 97, and I could easily spend 2 hours talking about Local Law 97 because there's so many facets to it, but very quickly.
20 minutes.
I know. Very quickly, it sets an absolute limit of carbon emissions on existing buildings in New York City that are greater than 25,000 square feet. It's roughly about 50,000 buildings in New York City that are subject to this law. And what it says is that every building in the city gets an absolute cap on emissions on a yearly basis that they're allowed to emit. And if the building emits more than that, they pay a financial penalty, which is the difference between their emissions minus the cap. Their emissions are based on the utility consumption, so it's directly relative to how much energy the building consumes. And so this law was passed in 2019. It actually goes into effect, or it is in effect this year. 2024 is the first year it's in effect. And it's a law that becomes more stringent over time. So for 5 years, there are these caps on all the buildings, and then in 2030, they ratchet down to about 50% of the value. In 2035, they go lower, 2040, all the way to net zero in 2050. And so it's this increasingly more difficult bar to achieve, again, from what I said earlier, on the actual building use, actually what's happening in real time. And so this law was passed in 2019, and you can imagine the response. That folks are going to have to pay these penalties, which I may add, in some cases can range into the millions of dollars a year for buildings. Now that's not the norm. That is the exception. In the first compliance period, about 80% of the buildings are fine-free, and in the second compliance period in 2030, that number switches, and it's about 20% of buildings are fine-free, and 80% are expected to pay fines. And those fines can range anywhere from very little all the way up. In some cases, we have a client that is expected to pay $5 million a year for one building in New York City here starting this year. Now, it's an extreme case. It's a very robust, big building with a lot of energy use, but still, you can imagine in 2019 when this all hit the books, there was a lot of discussion and resistance and conversation. And now the first year, we're kind of excited in a way to see what happens, to see where these results are once these filings happen next year and we know what the real numbers are. But I think the silver lining here, it's penalties, it's challenging, and obviously those penalties hit folks in different ways. But the silver lining here is that the conversations around decarbonization have accelerated dramatically. I mean, every single new project we work on, whether it's a renovation, a new building, whether it's a tenant looking to take a space, whether it's a condo or a co-op that has equipment that's met its useful life and they're looking to replace it, every conversation now is about carbon and about how the buildings are going to look in accordance with Local Law 97. So in that way, this local regulation, right, which I think is the first of its kind in the world, I believe, and one of the most aggressive, is really doing a good job to accelerate the transition. So it's very exciting.
No, that's great. And that's really giving us a tangible example of how this is impacting right here, right now. So it's refreshing because it's moving quickly compared to some of these other, especially the hard to abate sectors. My gosh, that's going to be, it's a process, but we need to get the ball rolling. And if the built environment can kick things off in a real way, then that's something to get excited about. So absolutely. An example from you, Holly.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, so what you just heard was tremendous, right? We're making progress in terms of legislation. We need that tailwind because that tailwind helps our customers adopt technology faster. On the other side of that, it brings a lot of complexity. So if you're an average building owner or a building operator, navigating through the complexity around what you can take advantage of and how to do that becomes really difficult. And so we find ourselves in a position a lot to help advise our customers on that front and how to navigate through all the different energy credits or the legislation, central legislation or local legislation and what that looks like. And so I'll give you an example of a company, an organization that actually Chris's company worked with us on right here in New York. And so this is the largest commercial office owner in New York City, 3.5 million square feet. It has its own zip code, the building does. And we've been partnering with this customer, like we do with many of our customers, for over a decade. A decade ago, we worked with them, to take advantage of and react to the demand management program and to convert their sort of cooling, their chiller plants, to use some of these ice tanks and the thermal storage and the thermal batteries I talked about before. And so we did this project and navigated through kind of the legislation at the time and helped them figure out how to save a couple of $1 million of operating cost every year, reduce their carbon emissions by 36 million metric tons, which is equivalent to about removing 3,200 cars from the roads, gas-powered cars from the road. Now, fast forward here this year, we're now working on how to get them using heat pump technology and less reliant on steam and plugged into more renewables to take it to the next level. And the end of this story will be 90% electric-powered building, another $1.5 million of operating cost savings every year, and the equivalent of removing an extra 500 gas-powered vehicles from the roads every year. And so what you hear is that, we've got solutions where we have legislative tailwinds. We've got the technology, we can make the business case work for customers, and so it's really needing all of this magic to come together, and it has really impactful results on both our customers' businesses, right back to the triple bottom line, right, around their profits, around their people, right? It's motivational, and there's a value prop that you bring when you show that you're a sustainable organization, and of course for the planet.
Are you allowed to tell us who this customer is?
Yeah.
I think so, right?
Yeah, I think so. We're going to. 55 Water Street here in New York is the customer. So.
Super interesting. I was going to just Google it, but we had enough information. We were going to figure it out. But go ahead.
It's a real success story, too, from the technology side, but also, and the regulations just mentioned earlier, sort of sparking the conversations. And then, as Rachel mentioned about incentives, that project is going to get millions of dollars of utility incentives. As part of the program, the Public Service Commission requires that local utilities provide incentives for projects like this, and they're going to get millions of dollars, which I do think was one of the reasons why it pushed it across the finish line, right? Without those incentives, because of the financial pressure of the infrastructure, it would have been more difficult. So all these things are kind of coming together right now.
Talk to us a little bit more about some of your clients. You're in a unique position to be able to share with this audience how the different sustainability requirements are evolving. And what are you seeing? What are the challenges? What are the successes? Give us a few more examples. Make this tangible for us.
Yeah, so it's pretty clear. You guys are in sessions today and you go to any events this week. Sustainability is completely a moving target, right? Anybody who thinks something is one thing, it's changing literally every day. A good example of that is one of my first projects at JB&B. I was the design engineer for a very prominent high-rise new office building. And the core sustainable concept of this project, the thing, and rightfully so at the time, was a cogen plant, a gas-fired engine in the building to generate electricity and heat. And 15 years ago, that was state-of-the-art. It was doing something better than the electric grid and burning gas for other reasons. But think about things have changed, right? I would literally get shot dead if I suggested to put a cogen plant in a project today. Please, I hope I don't offend the cogen people. But so things are changing dramatically. And so anytime we do have change, and change in this way, you're going to have challenges, right? It's just clear. Anytime you move the bar, you create a gap and things happen. And so with Local Law 97, with all these changes, it really has been difficult. It's been difficult in the workforce to adapt to new technologies. It's been difficult from an equipment and technology standpoint. We're talking about here saying how great technology is, but 5 years ago, that was not the case. We had this law passed in 2019 about Local Law 97, and we would go to our clients and say, great, let's do this. Let's decarbonize your building. Here, let me go get that one heat pump over here that's available on the market. Oh, wait. It's a 65-week lead time for that one heat pump. Okay, forget it. The project wouldn't go forward. There was a lack of availability of equipment, and the equipment that was available was a square peg in a round hole. It didn't fit the need. And so not having suitable equipment was literally torpedoing projects. And I think that that's changed, right? We've seen a lot of development of new models, new products come on the market. The lead times have come down, and the costs have come down, which I guess leads me to my second point about costs. So, I know, Rachel, you mentioned, it can be cheaper, but oftentimes it's not cheaper to decarbonize, especially when you're looking at, there are situations where it is when you're planning around capital planning cycles, and maybe you've committed money already, and it becomes a life cycle costing. But strictly speaking, if you're going to go into a building and you're going to rip out the infrastructure that's gas-powered, and you're going to replace it with heat pumps, I can pretty much guarantee you it's expensive. It's a lot of money. Not to mention the disruption to the occupants, to the tenants, to the business case. It can be really, really hard, and I can list a mile-long projects that we thought we were going to, go ahead with, but they just couldn't get across the finish line from a financial perspective. And even then, right, once it's operating, electric is 5 times more expensive than gas, and so those heat pumps help you with that math to kind of bring cost parity. But still, it's often more expensive day one to turn the equipment on, and no client is going to want to pay for something that has a negative ROI. So that challenge has been permeating, but it's changing dramatically with all the things we're talking about here. The incentives, the 179D, or the IRA tax, the IRA incentives, the investment tax credit, and the 179D are real. We just got a request today for a project in Philadelphia to help them figure out how much money they can get for the 179D, which could be a significant tax deduction, $5 a square foot for the work that they're doing. Questions all the time around the investment tax credit on thermal energy storage and the ice storage tanks that can help you with that. So the incentives that I just mentioned earlier, there's a project we're working on right now that's a heat pump. It's called a heat recovery project, where we keep heat within the building instead of letting it go. And it requires a type of heat pump. And it's a $3.5 million project. And of that $3.5 million, the client's going to get $750,000 of an incentive from the local utility company. That is huge. That is like literally huge. That is the difference. That's the difference between it happening or not happening.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of movement here. Very cool.
Super interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the affordability point, because I think I'm glad you brought it up. There's a lot of confusion. People are like, is it cheaper or not? So let's just spend a moment on it. And at RMI, we just did a lot of analysis on the economics of heat pumps and of electrification. And so this is what we've found. First, for new construction, by and large, it's going to be more affordable, lower cost to build all electric. And that intuitively makes sense, because you're setting up one energy system, electric, you're not extending gas lines. So that makes sense. I think we would all agree there. The rub really comes when you're talking about retrofits, right? When you're talking about retrofits, when your gas furnace or gas water heater dies, you want to get a heat pump. No, in those cases, it's not economical in terms of upfront costs to go to a heat pump. In those cases, it's typically 2 times the cost. But when you get the heat pump, you get cooling and heating at the same time. So if you haven't had cooling before and you're experiencing heat waves, now you're going to get air conditioning in that same piece of equipment. So there's some benefits there which are not monetized. But that's why we need incentives and financing, so we can get to some price parity on day one, because no one wants to shell out an extra 10 to 12K to get the heat pump.
Absolutely.
In terms of operating costs, it really varies across the US. If you have delivered fuels, electric resistance, you're going to save 10 to 30K annually on your energy bills if you go to a heat pump. It's just like no-brainer. Get the financing, get the incentives, go to a heat pump. You're going to save money over the lifetime of that appliance. For most Americans, for most households in the US, you will save money by, if you're a gas house, by going to a heat pump. But that's really, that statistic is really influenced by the Southeast, the Pacific Northwest, moderate climates that don't have a super high electricity bills. Where the economics is harder is in the Northeast, New York, where I'm from, California, and the upper Midwest. Places that have much, much higher electricity rates compared to gas, it's going to be harder on your energy bills to electrify. But on average, it's like $300 more per year, whereas so it's not tremendous. It's a huge equity issue. We need to look out for renters and low-income people, but it's not going to send you over the edge. And the last thing I wanted to say in terms of the operating costs is that, you know, as we've moved to EVs, we've developed EV tariffs. You know, if you get an electric vehicle, you own your house, you can sign up for a tariff, so you get beneficial rates. We're going to be looking towards the same things for electric heating. So just because it can be more costly today in some states, doesn't mean it's always going to be like that.
Rachel, I'm going to come back to you to ask about your dream policies. We're talking about what's already here and how it's being disseminated, but how much further can we push it? I'm going to come back to you on that. Holly, first to you, though. So can we debunk this myth that drives me up the wall, which is electrification and the transition to clean energy is taking away work? Rather, how are these innovations creating new opportunities for the workforce? How does your organization look at this?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, this is probably what we spend most of our time thinking about. So as we heard here, right, the technology and the solutions exist today. Where we see the largest challenge is really around the people to scale those solutions, to deploy them at scale. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about kind of workforce innovation as a company, right, and looking at, you know, diverse teams around perspectives and making sure, you know, that folks that we hire represent the communities that we operate in. We've got new initiatives to try to figure out how do we fill the funnel more. So for instance, we've started skills-based hiring. So what that means is in places where we would previously require a 4-year degree, we've gone and said, hey, are we sure that is required for this job? And we've gone, and there's probably a dozen or so categories of roles at our company, like some of our account managers or maybe test stand engineers, like there's a dozen categories of things where we've removed the engineering requirements and tried to broaden the aperture in terms of the candidates that we see, and we're seeing dramatic results there.
Nice.
I think the other piece of it is around service technicians. So in order to install and maintain the kind of technology and the solutions we're talking here, whether it's in your home, whether it's in a building, whether it's in a factory, you need service technicians. And it's estimated that just under 40,000 technicians are required every year for the next decade. Guess what? Like, those don't all exist, right? We've got a retirement bubble of people leaving. We need new people coming in. And so we're doing a lot of innovation around and finding ourselves in the position where we must do things there. So we've got a technician apprentice program where it's actually a 4-year program that is registered by the Department of Labor. And we've got our 4th cohort starting there. And what's been super interesting, when we've taken people that don't have any experience and from different kind of backgrounds, and we're taking them and bringing them into a program like this, we're seeing 12 times the number of applicants that apply for an apprentice job versus a technician role. And so we're trying to find ways to get more people into the funnel. I think the last thing I would say is really around tuition advancements and like the financial side. So for years we've all talked about tuition reimbursements, but not everybody has the money to kind of pay for it and then wait to get paid back. And so we've changed our policies around that, and we're seeing almost 1,000 people to date participate in kind of advanced education even within our company to try to learn, reskill or learn more about the kind of things we need. And so as I mentioned, this whole idea of bringing more folks into the workforce is super important to us. I think the other side of it is we're finding ourselves having to partner more and more earlier in middle schools and lower education grades to help inspire the next generation kind of up and coming STEM innovators, to be working with NGOs that support them, to be working with certification agencies to really make sure that we've got this robust pipeline of talent.
Nice.
So we're
Start young.
Yeah, we have to, right? And we know that we need a workforce to be able to deploy all the stuff we're talking about at scale here.
And thank you for sharing this, because this is the type of program that can be scaled across other sectors as well, right?
Absolutely.
This is not unique to the built environment. This is something that we should see picked up across the board. So Chris, how do you think about this?
Yeah, engineers, we're knowledge workers, right? It's about sending people into a problem that they don't know what they're going to get into, right? It's a unique bespoke solution every time. And the rate of change in our work is just accelerating. Like every day it's something new. And with that presents all new challenges. And so, for our firm, it was an old school mentality of a command and control, decades ago, where do your job, put your head down, do your thing. But we've realized that stepping back, letting folks make mistakes, letting them experiment, letting them express their diverse opinions and ideas, leading from the back, creating a sense of psychological safety for people in our company has really changed the game. It's allowed people to step up, to lean in, and it's just astounding when you give people space to let them be themselves and let them experiment. I have this saying that, people on my team, I say, make any decision you want, make as many mistakes as you want, as long as I can undo it.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is. It's like, make mistakes, screw it up, as long as it's not something that's going to take us down, right? Because that's how you learn, that's how you get better. And so we've just really seen a lot of people show up in our firm, and I think that that's important because we're going to require intuition and learning on the fly and understanding problems and people and concepts in order to be successful. So,
Yeah.
So Rachel, does your dream policy relate at all to the future workforce, reskilled workforce?
I mean, I don't have just one dream policy, but I would say that the workforce piece, Holly, the work that Train is doing to bring on the workforce is so important. And I think that the workforce piece is not just like a feel-good thing. It is just the backbone of building decarbonization. Because when you think about it, when people go to decarbonize their house, well, it's not like they're like in bed on their laptop looking at different EVs. What happens is they stop getting hot water or their furnace stops working and they're like, oh crap, I need a replacement in here right now. They don't want to wait. And so they're probably not thinking about a heat pump. They're just like, just get me the thing as soon as possible. And that's why it relies so much on the workforce, because what your HVAC contractor or installer, plumber, electrician tells you, that's going to have an outsized influence on the equipment that you buy. So I think that the workforce development piece is so essential and is really interwoven into all of our policy work, because we need to make this easier for contractors. They already have such headaches from how complicated incentives are set up and building codes, and it's so confusing, and like every different city has a different thing. So I think when we do our policy work, all of the dream policy, really has both, the low-income tenant and the workforce at the center. And how do we make it easier for those populations to lead and be at the forefront of this change?
I love that. Okay, so in the last few minutes that we have, I'm going to ask each of you to just think a little bit about, if we get this right, if we accelerate the transition to clean energy, if we decarbonize the built environment, how do we do it in a way that really creates healthier and more sustainable communities so that we don't leave anyone behind, so that everyone can reap the benefits and the opportunities that are going to come from a sector that is decarbonized, which will result generally in a healthier, more breathable environment, right? So cities will benefit, of course, but how do we ensure we don't leave anyone behind? So I'm gonna start with Chris.
Random question. It's a real concern, and what we've seen is that the folks that have the means are the ones that are out in front right now. The commercial developers are the ones making change. They're the ones that are leaning in. And so I think, understanding the policies, the incentives, education. There's a program here in New York called the New York City Accelerator, which is formed by New York City to get the word out about Local Law 97, to help communities understand what it takes to decarbonize, all the means and all the consultants that are available, all the financial incentives that are available. I think it's going to take a lot of education, a lot of information. We can't have a separation. It's not going to work.
Okay, Rachel.
Sure. I think making sure that the lowest income people benefit from this transition, you really need to look at it in terms of benefits and harms and making sure that there's guardrails. And so that brings us very quickly out of the climate and energy world into really intersectional work on tenants' rights and housing. So we need to have, as we adopt building codes and building performance standards and all the regulations that are going to speed the transition, we need to also make sure that there's tenant protections, that people's rent is not going to skyrocket when their landlord electrifies, that there's energy bill protections, that their bills won't increase, that they won't get disconnected if they can't pay. So it's really a tremendous opportunity to bring together, traditional environmental and climate work with this growing environmental justice movement and economic justice movement together to find the solutions. So, here in New York City, there's sort of vibrant environmental justice community that really has so much of the wisdom at hand in what they want to see in policymaking. So a lot of it is about inclusion, community stakeholder work, and designing more intersectional policies.
And Holly, before we come to you, Chris, I want us to end on the two things you said we could do right now, but first, Holly.
Sure. To add a couple of thoughts to this, I think first, we'll know when we've gotten there, when we've arrived, when we're not talking about decarb anymore, and we're not talking about planet and human health. It's just a thing, and we've solved it, right? I think we find ourselves often in positions where we're helping customers of all types find money to fund their things, right? And so I think there's a piece around the opportunity for all around in terms of how we're partnering with customers and really helping finding creative ways to fund the projects they have, so everybody's coming along. I think the other side of that I just mentioned here is that in addition to kind of solving the building needs, there's also a piece around helping uplift the communities. And so we do a lot of work and feel very strongly around making sure that we're helping develop the communities, both in terms of STEM communities, in terms of energy in our communities and volunteerism, and our company, for instance, pays for a day, every year for employees to volunteer in the communities themselves. And so there's a piece around how do we solve for all and get us to this energy kind of equity and this energy equilibrium. And the other side of that is how do we make sure that we as organizations are giving back to the same communities that are fueling our factories and fueling our businesses.
Awesome, and thank you for thinking about it like that. That's so important, and again, great to share, because not just within this sector, across sectors, the way to think about this.
So I have a request for everybody here. You can't just come to this thing and listen to everybody talk. You actually have to do something. And there's something that everybody can do so easily, it just blows me away that no one's doing this. I guarantee you, at some point in your life, you signed up for electric service at your apartment or your house or wherever you are, and you probably never thought about it again. You just pay the bill, and you don't think about it. But literally in 5 minutes, you can call your electric company, go online, you can switch to renewable power. Because if you don't actively switch, then you're just going to get dirty power from the grid. And everybody can switch, and if they do that, it sends a signal. It sends a signal that we need more renewable power generation. It sends a signal that people care, and the market will move that way. And literally, you're just doing a good thing, because electricity that you consume is carbon-free. So please do it. It's so easy. In fact, there should be a booth out front here.
Yes, that's great feedback, actually. I really wanted to end on a call to action. Thank you for providing it, and please join me in thanking these incredible experts in this space. I really appreciate your contributions, Rachel, Chris, and Holly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.